Okay, welcome back to another episode of Tailored Healing TV in this special series, Hacking the Silicon Valley Matrix with Rex Lee. On our last episode, we spoke with Rex and Merle Garrison, and we opened up the insight for everyone as to what the Silicon Valley Matrix really is. So I kind of want to start there today. Rex, when people hear the Matrix, they often think of content or social media, but I felt in the last episode you were pointing to something much deeper than that. So, what is actually being controlled inside of this system?
Well, there's a lot of things that go into the system that underpin it. Starting 12 years ago, when I reverse engineered a Samsung smartphone for a defense contractor that I was working with to see if the phone would be safe to use in a confidential and protected environment. This is when the Android OS was starting to proliferate. And the devices weren't being used mainly for commercialism, but they were being used by corporate America through bring your own device programs. And so, dating back to that point, what I didn't realize is that what I was doing was peeling the layers of the onion back on what was going on in the industry. Now, a lot of people call it surveillance capitalism, but if you want to get down to technical terms for what all this surveillance and data mining is, then or industry terms, not technical terms, then you're looking at the data-driven advertising business model, which is what most commonly people outside of the industry know as targeted advertising. And that's built on behavioral information about you. And so you get specific ads that are targeted towards you. And this is all relevant because this is the foundation of what we're going to be discussing here. In 2000, I believe it was 2017, I was asked by Senator Blumenthal's office to be an advisor for the Facebook Cambridge Analytica scandal. Now, you've heard about that scandal, correct?
Yes, I have.
Okay, from a millennial point of view, what do you believe that scandal was about?
When going back to the origins of Facebook, it automatically took me back to the film The Social Network and the foundings of Facebook and what it was, but also the mistrust from users when it came to building the infrastructure of that system, which people didn't find out till years later because as a millennial, when we were given the hands of social media and getting to connect with our peers automatically, it felt exciting, but we also weren't given the education behind it. And so watching
Right.
that was really revealing to the situation in its entirety.
So that's good. That's a what you're describing there is a knowledge gap. So what's going on today is a knowledge gap. That's what big tech is exploiting. They understand that you do not understand how everything operates. Thus being the reason why I reverse engineered the Samsung Galaxy Note smartphone. I really wasn't aware that of that time that all of the data that was being taken from the device was being monetized. I thought it was to make the experience better, but the data was going to be protected. So that was my first perception, and that was my first run into with the knowledge gap because I came up through IT, my first in tech and telecom from 1983 on, and my first classes um, in college regarding programming were Fortran and COBOL. Now, a lot of people that might sound like languages they never heard of before regarding today's technologists. If they're not historians and they're just learning, or people are learning about programming code, they wouldn't really understand what those older languages were or protocols and communications like CDPD, TDMA, GSM. I've been through it all, and each one really evolved toward LTE and the coding that we see in computers today, like PowerShell and all these other languages that are out there today. So back then, you had to have a knowledge. We all the way up until the iOS was developed and Apple iOS. everybody had a good understanding of what was underneath. Everybody understood that, or at least in my generation, when I worked on when Windows first came out, those of us who were working on computers during that time working on what was called the DOS operating system. And this is relevant to Cambridge Analytica. I didn't want to, I'm not taking everybody down a rabbit hole here that's not relevant because I'm going to explain to you what that scandal was and why it's so important to what we're talking about right now. So back in my day, when Windows came out, that was based on a point and click GUI operating system that actually Xerox invented and then Apple adopted it. Some say they stole it. There's a book called Pirates of Silicon Valley, which is a great read if especially for your generation, if you want to catch up and you want to fill that knowledge gap in, Pirates of Silicon Valley is a great book. It's how Apple ripped off Xerox, Microsoft ripped off Apple for Windows, and so forth. Well, when the point and click came out, what that eliminated, that started the knowledge gap. That was the inflection point at which companies knew that, hey, if we make this so simple and intuitive and user friendly, we can start to manipulate things and add things. And users don't have to be technologists anymore. Users can just use the computer. It's great. Trust me, intuitive computing is great. But herein lies how we evolve to a point where they exploit this knowledge gap where you don't understand how it works. You just don't. And so that's what you just described to me is the big problem. That's the big disconnect. For me, why the senators like Blumenthal and Ted Cruz's office and so forth their offices wanted me to help them write questions for the senators to ask Mark Zuckerberg because they too were vulnerable to this knowledge gap. So they didn't understand what was under the hood. So they needed somebody like me to come in and help them bridge that knowledge gap. And what that scandal was all about, now that I'm going to bring this all the way back home, that scandal was simply about behavioral data. So, or contextual data or plaid data. There's several different technology names, and I don't want to I don't want to talk technocracy at this point. I want to just give an executive summary of what's under the hood, and then we'll in the following interviews I'll actually show what's under the hood in terms of exposing codes and algorithms to people because that's what's going on today. Everybody wants transparency regarding the algorithms that are running this thing. Well, me being a app and platform developer working in the industry and helping to start the world's largest legal hacking firm, the world's largest legal hacking firm, Houdini Soft, I'm here to show everybody what's underneath the hood, not to scare everybody. I'm not about banning AI. I'm not about banning data collection. And as long as it's done through knowledgeable consent and everything, I'm here to help change things, but also fill in that knowledge gap. So what happened with Facebook, Cambridge Analytica, it was about taking that data about you that was collected off of Facebook through there was a guy named Alexa Kogan who developed an app and launched it through Facebook's ecosystem out. That's where you would buy, or not buy or download like Angry Birds and all that. That would come out of Facebook's ecosystem, right? So people downloaded this app not realizing it was developed by a global data broker. I don't know. I don't know if he was out of Russia or where he was based. He wasn't based in America, and he ended up collecting over 300. He collected data on 300 million people globally. 80 million of them lived in the United States. And what he was able to do with the contextual data that he was collecting from them was to be able to identify personality traits. So what they're going to do is they're going to put everybody in 5 personality buckets for targeted advertising. This is exactly how targeted advertising works. So then what they can do once they separate these 80 million people into these personality buckets, then they're able to put together ads that are customized to manipulate you, to nudge you. It's gentle. It's really if you were to look at the first layer of brainwashing technology, this is what you would do. Now, the industry term for this is brain hijacking technology. So that's the first layer is to collect the data through addictive technology or brain hijacking technology. And then you break it into five different buckets and then you apply AI. And back then they've had AI for a long time. It just wasn't generative AI. So you apply AI and predictive analytics to it, and then you can make targeted political ads. In this case, it involved Donald Trump, and of all people, this one of the senators' offices that I was giving questions to his staffers was Ted Cruz. And that was the scandal was that they were looking to, based on contextual or behavioral data, they were looking to nudge enough people in counties to sway the vote to Donald Trump to where he would just win those counties. Now, out of the 80 million, you can break it up into several camps undecided, and then hardcore Trump, hardcore Hillary Clinton. The hardcore Trump and Hillary Clinton people can't be swayed by targeted advertising. That's not what they were trying to do. It was those independent voters who were in between that they could slightly nudge to the right or nudge to the left in certain counties. I don't need to nudge people to the right or the left in Texas to influence an election. Where I need to do that, especially for a conservative like Donald Trump, where I need to do that is in Wisconsin, within Pennsylvania, within those areas, and then you can start to move the needle enough to capture key counties and key cities. And that's exactly what they were doing. Now, beforehand, contextual data, and this goes back to Obama actually started this. You know, if you go back to W days, contextual data or behavioral data was used for consumer purposes, where, hey, we want to nudge you to buy a hamburger or go to the movies or buy Nike tennis shoes or something like that. It evolved into being able to be weaponized and politicized. This is where it gets dangerous, and this is where it becomes a threat to the public.
So, Rex, I want to tie this into a conversation you and I have had before. One of the phrases that you used was digital DNA. And this phrase comes
Yes.
to mind specifically because essentially, especially when we're talking about voting, they are building profiles based on what you're already doing, your online activity, the essence of who you are, essentially. And this language shifts responsibility. So, why is digital DNA a more accurate term? And what does that change legally or ethically in this situation?
So digital DNA, that's a great, that's a terminology that is really is great in fact that it really narrows down what they want to collect. So a lot of people, you know, when I start talking about the amount of data that is being collected from you, then a lot of people say, well, what are they going to do with all my conversations? What are they going to do with all of my emails and texts? It's too much for somebody. People's perception is that there's a live person like me sitting behind a computer at Facebook, Google, Microsoft, Apple, or ByteDance, which is a Chinese app developer, TikTok, and Lemonade and other apps, like there's somebody there literally monitoring all this. That's not how it works at all. Nobody's seeing you, or they're afraid that, oh God, if I do something embarrassing in front of that camera on my PC, somebody's going to see me because they're watching me live. That's not what's going on at all. At that no worries out there. You don't even have to put tape over your cameras, you know, unless you're in an intimate situation or whatever. But no live person's watching you. That's not what's going on. This is being, all of that data gets put into a database. And now they have to break that database down into your profile so that they can know what bucket to put you in for targeted advertising. And so that's what that is. And internally, what it's been referred to in the past, I don't know if they're still using this terminology in Silicon Valley today, but that terminology for that was your digital DNA profile. This is the most valuable commodity on the planet. Everybody says information is the most valuable commodity on the planet. No, it's not. Behavioral identifiable data on each individual, which is your digital DNA, that is the most valuable commodity on the planet because now I can break people up ethnically, economically, and so forth. And then there's different ways you can market, different ways you can market products to. You know who to sell a Mercedes to or who to sell a Volkswagen Jetta to. So that's how important this is. You know who by their job is an executive for a company or a frontline employee, a board member, a senior executive, a CEO. That's what your digital DNA profile can reveal about you.
And you know what fascinates me about this is how predictable humans actually are, and we don't realize it. But now the fact that digital DNA becomes this new commodity where people are producing information and data all the time, and yet they have no ownership over it. And you've mentioned this on a lot of your previous talks that I've seen before about it being like invisible labor.
Yes, yes. So what you're saying when they don't have ownership of it, what we're looking at here is you don't have agency over it. Not just ownership. You don't have agency. It doesn't mean ownership applies implies that you own something that you paid for. Agency is something that's sovereign to you. That's yours. That's your soul, your freedoms, your civil liberties. That's exactly what we've lost in this process. So let's get back to digital DNA profiling. What people don't understand is what is that made of? What is that? I'm going to go over some relevant buckets of information that make up your digital data profile. It's your personal, business, medical, legal, biometric, behavioral, location, employment, and your again, I went over medical. It's your health. Health and medical are a little bit differently. Medical is what you go to the doctor for. Health is what you're doing to exercise and all of that. Data, so you have to break all that data out. And then there's a bucket called sensitive user data and location data. Those two buckets are relevant to each other. So the location data includes multiple ways to track you. A lot of people realize they think they're good when they go into their smartphone, for instance, like my Apple iPhone, and I turn off location services. Um, when you turn off location services, let me ask you this: do you believe that when you turn that off, you're not being tracked? That you're not giving them the okay to track you, right?
No, I've always believed it. There's still some sort of tracking with the IMEI
Yes.
number and SSID. That's all information still going somewhere. So I don't ever believe it's fully off.
Yeah, exactly. It's not. But that's one way to track you. But what a lot of people don't realize is that there's this thing called near field communications. And there are these things all around us today called near field communication tags. And you see them at gas pumps when you just hold your card with a chip over it, or the gas pump has Android or Apple Pay. They're at the registers. They put them in smart street lights now, and they can track you through what's called near field communication tags or NFC tags. That's one way.
Mm.
If they can't reach you by that way, a lot of people are required to go on Wi-Fi to get large amounts of data, especially at home. The phone will switch over to Wi-Fi. Sometimes you're on a platform and it's either too expensive to do it over cellular, but you're at a place where you can get onto a Wi-Fi. Those are Wi-Fi access points. So I click onto my Wi-Fi access point, it knows where I'm at. There's cell phone tower triangulation down to about 4 or 5 meters that they can track you through cell phone triangulation. This goes back to the days when BlackBerry was first released. As you know, we discussed in the last episode. The company I worked for SkyTel was the marketing arm for research and motion in America. We did the very first BlackBerry implementations, and we realized back then we knew we could track people through cell phone tower triangulation. It was really scary when we found that out way before there was a GPS tracker ever put into these devices. So you have GPS, near field communication tags, Wi-Fi access points. A lot of people didn't realize this. I can actually, whenever a device connects to a Bluetooth a device, that can trigger in a location tag. And this was found out through COVID. A lot of people started seeing news that people who who didn't take the vaccine, they knew who you were and they could identify you through your Bluetooth on your device. So a lot of people are like, what is this? They can track you through Bluetooth. Yes, they can track you multiple ways. So even if you say, hey, there's ways to turn off NFC in your device too. You just have to know how to use it. If you turn off um, uh, location services and NFC, they can still track you different ways. Wi-Fi, cell phone, Bluetooth, and so forth. You can't escape it. Okay, you just can't. Then there's another way they can track you through biometric data. So I don't have my device with me, but I'm in my friend's Android car. They already have my voice print because that's part of what they collect for your digital DNA profile. And they literally can hear me talking to my friend in his Android car with his smartphone there, but I don't have my device with me. They can identify you up to 98% of accuracy through your voice print. So you can't
So
escape this.
I have a question to that. So when we're talking about our voice print specifically, and I'm sure this will apply generally as well, when you say they, are you just referring to these large language models or training systems that are picking up and generating data and collecting it and kind of redistributing it like the information highway?
Yeah, this is before this architecture began, before what people have heard about in terms of large language models. That's a terminology used for generative pre-trained generative AI training. A lot of people don't know what GTP means. Well, it's generative pre-trained. Um, uh,
Yeah.
uh,
Transformer?
yes, and so that that that's training AI. This has nothing to do with training AI. They're collecting this data, and then the other bucket that they're going to collect as well is sensitive user data. That's the gold mine. That's the gold mine. That's the expletive in in Silicon Valley words, to collect. We got to collect that. Therein lies the ability. There's so much data they can collect on you to identify who you are through your text messages, your emails, your email attachments, your calendar data, your bank accounts, every account you put on your phone, whether it's your banking account, medical accounts, like if you were a patient at MD Anderson Hospital in Houston, and they have an app, you put that on there. Social media, everything is on there, and they can actually the apps are designed, as we spoke the last time. Our operating systems are designed on an open application programmable interface, so the apps interlink with each other and share this data. So now they've got your emails, your text messages, your email attachments, your calendars, your contacts. And this is all indiscriminate, by the way. It doesn't look at anything in terms of consumer data and your use of the app or the platform like Facebook. Only back in the day before apps, and you got onto Facebook through www.facebook.com, the URL, they could only track you during that session and only what you inputted in there. But the going through the URL alone did not give them access to your hard drive or your access to other apps and programs that you were using, like text messaging or emails and all of that. That was all safe. That changed with iOS, Android, and Windows. So then the apps could interlink, and then you can just imagine, well, really what they're doing, Taylor. I'll put it to you, and let's just say we worked for the Gambino crime family, and when this is tantamount to wiretapping you and putting surveillance technology on all your electronics and putting a GPS tracker on your car. That's exactly what this is. This is a total invasion of your privacy. And I want to drive this home. This would never have been able to have happened before iOS, Android, or Windows 8, 10, and 11. I'm not talking about Windows 7. Windows 7 was the last secure closed API architecture operating system that you had total agency over that, total control over that. That all went out the window with these operating systems. That you couldn't have never imagined to have done this in a million years in the 1970s, 80s, or 90s, in a million years. That all went out the window with the first iOS and then Android and Windows 8, 10, and 11 operating systems that proliferated to smartphones, tablets, PCs, and all the connected products that we have today. So that's the bucket of information. That's how they collect it through these apps, which are designed to be malware. They're the best designed for malware in the world. These guys in Silicon Valley design malware better than any state-sponsored hacker working for the Russian military, Chinese military, or the US military itself. Not even the NSA hackers could have designed the features that are in these apps that allow them to do audio, video, and physical surveillance on the end user 24 by 7 while data mining over 5,000 data points that make up your digital DNA profile to do what with? To exploit for profit through targeted advertising.
So I want to ground the audience for just a minute and circle back to something Rex mentioned a few times, which was about apps. That is probably the most popular question I see, which is, can't I just delete the apps off of my phone? Will that change anything? And you said that the real power isn't the apps, it's the operating systems.
Right.
So why does operating system level control change everything?
So the control of that, if you were to look at it this way, the operating system is everything. So when they developed it on an open architecture, um, um, open application programmable architecture, right? Interface architecture, API. When they did that, that meant that this was not a secure operating system. It was not a secure form of communications, telecommunications, or computing. Therein lies the reason they did this on an open architecture basis is to collect all of this contextual and plaid data that allows them to build these digital DNA profiles and identify behavioral data and behavioral things that even psychological and cognitive um, uh, uh, can be even exploited as well, data. So it goes beyond this. And we'll talk about the brain hijacking technology and all that in a separate bucket. I just want to go back to your question. So it's the operating system that controls this. Now, when we bought computers, and we talked a little bit about this with Merle in the last program, when we bought our computers up until iOS and then Android and Windows 8, 10, and 11, it was what all of the pre-installed programs were called bloatware back then. And remember what I went back to saying up until Windows 7, we had agency over that. We could go in, I could unbox my computer and I could go in and just get rid of all that crap that was pre-installed in there. I wasn't blocked from doing that. So I could go in there, do a custom config, and then pull all the bloatware off, all the little pop-up ads and all that other stuff. We had full control over that. They took that away from us because what they did now is they pre-installed all of these apps on our smartphone. So when you get your new smartphone, it's already pre-installed. Now, every developer of the apps that are on this phone outside of Apple's purview, All of those apps developers paid Apple, just like they pay Alphabet, Google, and Windows billions of dollars to be that pre-installed app that's protected, that goes on the devices where people don't have to go, for instance, like Facebook. I don't have to now go into the App Store to get Facebook. It's right in front of me. So they don't get lost with the other millions of other apps that are in there. It's really unfair business practices, is what it is. It only allows a few companies can even pay the billions of dollars to be the pre-installed apps that are on there. Now, you cannot, in a lot of cases, in some cases now they give you more flexibility, but not all, but you cannot control 100% of the pre-installed apps. To get back to your friends, to get back to the questions that you're getting about, can I just remove the apps? Well, if you remove all the apps, including the apps of necessity, in their mind, they're thinking, oh, these are all the entertainment apps, social media apps. I don't need those. I do need my phone app, right? Because everything's an app today. So for my phone to function, they made a phone app. For my contacts to function, they made a contact app. Those apps I call, they're different buckets of apps. Those apps I call apps of necessity, the very apps that you need. You need to make phone calls. You need to connect to the internet. You need to house your contacts, your calendar information, your emails, and all of that. The stuff you use for day to day business and personal communications between friends and family. So they turn those into legal malware. Not to mention, there are hundreds of unseen apps in there called system apps that you can't uninstall, you can't control, you can't disable them. So you're forced to be surveilled and data mined by them. So the system app, so even let's just say you just said, oh, I just want to use my phone as a speaker and just listen to stuff, right? I'm going to brick it. It doesn't stop the system apps. They're designed as malware from collecting all of the information off of your phone. So you can't control it. The other thing that they did, Android, their Android used to name their operating systems individually, Jelly Bean. So they had like Jelly Bean, and they had evolutions all the way up to Marshmallow and Oreo and all these other ones after that. I could get under the BIOS and audit what was pre-installed on there. I might not be able to um, um, disable it or uninstall it, but I could at least see it, right? And that's how I found out. That's how I found pre-installed Chinese surveillance technology in the device that I reverse engineered for space data, the defense contractor I was working for, and we'll go into that in a minute. But that's how I found it. Up until then, and then when Marshmallow came out, they realized, and this is this could be very factual. This is as a result of me being hired by the Department of Homeland Security Science and Technology Division for their 2017 study on mobile device security because of that Chinese surveillance technology that I found in a Samsung Galaxy Note I bought in the United States from a T-Mobile corporate store. So no, you getting rid of apps isn't going to help you. The devices are just not secure, private, and regarding brain hijacking technology, they're not safe. And I've got two admissions from two carriers on that fact that I leveraged legally through a formal complaint against T-Mobile I filed with the FCC, forcing them to be transparent about how these phones operate. So I've got two carriers, Verizon and T-Mobile, that have admitted this, that any smartphone, tablet, PC, connected product, PC server, connected vehicle, anything supported by Android, iOS, and Windows are not private forms of communications or computing due to uncontrollable pre-installed surveillance and data mining technology under the BIOS.
You mentioned a little bit earlier about people feeling like surveillance is one person watching them, like they have their own personal agent behind a screen. But can you walk us through how fragmented data becomes actionable intelligence inside of systems, like, for example, Palantir?
Okay, now it's funny you brought up Palantir. I spent the last um, close to 6 or 7 months researching their architecture. So, like hacking Silicon Valley, I hacked how they surveil for governments and militaries. I actually did a flow chart on that. I don't want to release that to the public yet
Okay.
because in the process, I wasn't hacking anything. So nobody from Palantir, the government, they all know who I am anyways. Nobody from the government, I'm not hacking anything. I just understand the architecture so I can put things together to put a flow chart on that. And so let's discuss that. We just discussed the first layer of the onion. So and we actually discussed it in deeper terms than what I wanted to during this session. I wanted to just kind of give a high level view of what's under the hood. So what we're describing here is let's go back and say, okay, what are we looking under the hood? What are we seeing? What is this hood? What's the vehicle? Well, the vehicle is the AI quantum algorithmic control system. Now, that is what is underpinning operating systems, hardware, like smartphones, um, connected products, and so forth, underpinning the global internet. There are different structures to legally uphold the system. There's legislative structures to get governments to help uh, control this. There's a government and tech collusion and so forth. So I've documented over 30 layers in the last 13 years. So when I went back to peel the onion off of the Android iOS at that time, then I peeled back the app layer and what was pre-installed into the device and how it all worked and found out apps were legal malware and that they were monetizing the data. And then the digital DNA profiles, that's from another layer, a totally separate layer. That's what's happening after they collect it and why they're collecting it and why they build these digital DNA profiles on everybody. By the way, I just want to mention that I watched Tron Ares, and they have a scene in that movie of Tron Ares looking up the digital DNA profile of the CEO of Incom, Flynn's company in the movie, right? That was the best depiction I've ever seen in a movie. He literally went to a digital DNA profile on that person. It's a dossier. So imagine the CIA wants to know about Taylor or Rex. They would have a dossier on us. We've seen that in movies dating back to the 1950s. Here's the dossier on that person. That's your digital DNA profile. And he was flipping through it like he was on a touch screen, starting with her birth, her childhood, all the way through her school years, education, and professional life, so that he can understand who this person was. That's what they're doing. That's the digital DNA layer that we just discussed, and we discussed a little bit on how do you and this was a great place to start, Taylor. That was perfect. How do you build that layer? How do you build that profile? How do you put together that dossier on everybody? And your digital DNA profile, I'm sorry to tell all of your audience members, they're way past the aggregate stage of collecting all the data and aggregating it. They've already got one on everybody on the planet. Anybody who has touched a smartphone, a tablet PC, been in front of a computer, been in a connected car, anybody, they've already built your digital DNA profile. So they no longer, the aggregate stage and the complicated and laborious stage of putting all this data together is already way, that's so far in the rearview mirror, it's not even funny. They've had a digital DNA profile on everybody, especially anybody who started using the free Google web browser in the 1990s. Because that, if you want to know the inflection point, it started somewhat there, but you can really go back to Netscape, who an engineer over there invented the first cookie to collect a little bit of contextual data, and then it went from the cookie to the Google web browser to the iOS operating system, Android, and Windows operating systems. They already have that digital DNA profile. So now that they have that, they can monetize it. But now you need a system structurally to make all this legal because it's, to me, it should be illegal as hell. And this is where it's become legal now for the government to conduct audio, video, physical surveillance on you and data mine you without a warrant because now they can do it through the AI quantum algorithmic control system because they can do it by proxy because when you clicked on I agree, if you want to know how we got to this point, when you clicked on I agree incrementally over the last 30 years, as everybody started clicking on I agree incrementally, the system constructed itself. And then they had the technological features of the system, and then they build in the legal and legislative part of the system as well. So again, I've documented over 30 layers of this system. And what we're going to do in this series is we're going to look at it as the algorithm, the AI quantum algorithmic control system, where surveillance capitalism, data-driven targeted advertising, surveillance by government by proxy, tech-based hybrid warfare, all the bad things that you hear about the system incrementally, addictive technology, which is back in the news, those are only symptoms or features of the system. And why, and what this leads to is why haven't congressional hearings on all this been effective? How come the FTC, FCC aren't enforcing existing consumer and child protection laws outside of the scope of Section 230, which we always hear shields the tech industry? That's not true. We're going to go through that process because that's all part of the total system, and we're going to give your audience a knowledge gap that they don't have. And they don't, I'm not talking about a technical knowledge gap. I'm talking about a knowledge gap of understanding the control system that they live under today.
Well, I want to say that no need to apologize at all. I know you said I'm sorry to tell you all this, but I think that awareness right now is the ultimate superpower because as long as we're learning about how these systems work, the evolution of awareness, which happens in Tron Ares, it's all about a program becoming conscious within this digital system. And that changes the outer layers as well, I believe. So, one final question that I have for you today. If total disengagement is not realistic for people, because we've already spoken about in previous episodes how the world's financial system is shifting to this or has already been framed within
It's
this.
done. It's done. It's
Yeah.
already here.
Where does real agency exist now?
None. There is none. So what? Let's. What I want to do is I'm going to explain something in a way your audience can understand it. Because I hear so many people that say privacy is no big deal. You know, I get my entertainment, um, enjoyment. I use my smartphone for necessity. That outweighs my privacy. And so what if my civil liberties are eroding? I'm not the criminal. I'm not the terrorist. I'm not the target of the government. That's not true. This is a silent layer of control that nobody sees, feels, or touches. I'll tell you the people who felt it the most. So back in the news is addictive technology, the LA trial that's going on with TikTok, Snapchat, Meta, and so forth. The social media platforms are back in there because of the addictive brain hijacking technology built into the apps, along with manipulative advertising technology. That's the ability to apply predictive analytics and AI to the data that you collect to build up a behavioral profile on somebody. And then there's another technology that just arrived on the scene with chat GTP or generative AI. And that is a technology that was discovered in 1966 by AI researcher Joseph Weizenbaum. This is why history is so important. History is important to every aspect of your life. If you don't know history, you're going to be manipulated and controlled to the ends of the earth. Joseph Weizenbaum in 1966 developed the first AI chatbot called Eliza with a Stanford researcher. And they realized that they developed it with all good intentions. They didn't see the unintended consequences until they launched this thing through testing. So they took students from Stanford University and exposed them to this thing to help the students for psychological reasons. They literally at that time said, if we can automate a psychologist, people will open up to an automated psychologist more than a human psychologist and explain more things about what's bothering them and then can be healed quickly. That's literally what that was their goal. What they didn't understand is that yes, the students did do it and they started to the unintended consequence of that, they started to humanize it. And this wasn't a chatbot that could talk to you. They didn't have that technology yet. It was coming through text, right? So the students were going back and forth and they humanized it. Then they thought, oh my God, if they humanize this technology and it advances to where we're at today with generative technology, they could be indoctrinated. They can be manipulated. What we're seeing with brain hijacking technology and manipulative advertising technology is amplified tenfold with the Eliza effect because now you can indoctrinate somebody through, you can indoctrinate them with consumerism, ideology, and political ideology. So you can actually indoctrinate people. You could use this technology and turn people into Marxist, communist, conservatives, Democrats, capitalists, and all of that through a slow process. And that was the danger in it that he discovered in 1966 and wrote an AI ethics book in 1975. And this was the number one thing that you can never allow people to humanize technology. You can't allow them to humanize AI or technology. So when we look under the control system and you look at it as the AI quantum algorithmic control system, that's what this has evolved into. And so what we want to do is understand the how it's built and fill these knowledge gaps. I don't think people need the knowledge gap of exactly how an algorithm is coded. They need to understand how it's designed and what it's meant to do. And that's what we're going to do because some of this has been exposed in the social dilemma with divisive algorithms. That's only a divisive algorithm is only a symptom of a much larger problem, and why these congressional hearings are failing and everything coming back to that point. Why the FTC doesn't know how to police this thing or state AGs. They're dealing with all of these features one off, and that will never solve the problem. You have to solve the problem of the AI quantum algorithmic control system because it's embedded in so many devices out there, billions of devices. You can't uproot that. It would shut the economy down if you did it. You now have to look towards legislation in terms of an electronic bill of rights and also clean data practices. I'm on the board for the Clean Data Alliance. There's a way to collect data legally and ethically, and I think as many people would participate if they were told the truth that rather than being deceived into the system or coerced through a legal contract called your terms of use, that's really a contract of adhesion. You know what happens if you don't accept that contract. You can't use your products or your devices, so you're forced into the system. You're forced into digital servitude, and you're an uncompensated information producing slave. And like in the Matrix, getting back to your question of harm, well, the parents in LA who filed these lawsuits, they felt it. Their kids have been addicted, harmed, and killed in the worst way they've experienced harm. Now, we'll get into other layers of harm, and this goes back not just to these parents, this goes back to the Facebook, Instagram, whistleblower hearings, and so forth. The kids have been addicted, harmed, and killed for 15 years now, almost a whole generation of them, and nothing is getting done. So that's the first harm. But then you look at financial harm, exploitation, consumer oppression, and exploitation, and everything, and then you realize what is the AI quantum algorithmic control system? It has turned into the tyrannical AI surveillance age. And then we'll get into that. And we'll get into the, like peeling the onion back, we're going to look at how you're harmed. And when I explain this, when I'm speaking to people, they get it. It's like, oh God, I never, I didn't want to lose my privacy to be somebody's uncompensated information producing slave, much less be indoctrinated by these people to buy shoes or vote for a political candidate, taking us back to Facebook, Cambridge Analytica.
Well, thank you so much, Rex, for answering my questions and also in a very scholarly aspect that people can kind of take the emotional aspect out of it, even though this is probably enraging for a lot of people to understand this framework, but hopefully it also provides some peace of mind. And my hope is that in the next episode, we can cover brain hijacking a little bit more in the details so that people understand the parts that
Yes.
can help them expand. So thank you
Yep.
so much for your time today.
Thank you. And just I'll close with this. You said people are going to be enraged. Well, they just took if you watch this episode, you just took the red pill of knowledge. And you're waking up in the goo like Neo in the Matrix and looking around and realizing that, you've been an uncompensated slave. And it's literally why are we calling it hacking Silicon Valley? Well, you got to look at it from that aspect. We're waking people up for them to realize what has been going on. And like the people in the Matrix, because it was silent and not physical, they never understood they were being harmed. They just were going through life with blissful ignorance, the blue pill, and not realizing the harm in it. And that's part of the knowledge gap that we're going to fill today. Thank you, Taylor.
Thank you, Rex. So I will see you all on the next episode of Tailored Healing TV in the series Hacking the Silicon Valley Matrix with our guest Rex Lee. Thank you so much, Rex, and we'll see you on the next episode.
Thank you.